Welcome to RHI Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today, we are joined by Lawrence Byrne, a partner with Pedersen and Hope's Litigation and Dispute Resolution Practice Group. He specializes in nightclub and entertainment venue law. Larry takes a litigation mitigation approach. This approach includes addressing employment and independent contractor agreements, employee training, security training, including bringing in outside experts, and de-escalating conflicts and conflict avoidance. An additional mitigation strategy includes reviewing insurance policies.
Hey, Larry, it's so great to meet you. Robert Smith has spoken very highly about your work and what you do, but as a way to introduce yourself a little bit of background in your current role and really why you're here to talk today.
So nice to meet you, Jim. I'm an attorney. I'm licensed in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Florida, and I represent clubs in each of those jurisdictions. Uh, a lot of what I do is when I originally have a client, we look at ways to minimize litigation, and I do that from kind of two prongs. I do it from the employee side, so what can we do to minimize employee issues? And then we look at it from the public side and the client side. What can we do to make the club safer, to make the club more compliant with current regulations, and to train staff so that there's less litigation involved. And if there is litigation, because there always will be, that it's defensible. So I try and set myself up for success.
Do you deal specifically with civil liability, or do you also look at some regulatory, administrative liability with the venues?
90% of my work is the civil liability. I will oversee some regulatory issues, licensing and the like. But those issues kind of go hand in hand. If we have a lot of civil claims, the people that are doing the regulatory filings for us and applications are going to have a tougher time. So to the extent we can minimize our civil liability, we maximize the attorneys that are doing our licensing work uh,
No, so by really
ability to get
focusing in on
licensed.
the civil liability and the practices of the venue, you're ultimately going to be helping them with their regulatory responsibilities.
Exactly. Yeah,
Oh, okay, yeah. So it doesn't work the other way where, well, I guess it would if you really help the business comply with the regulations, you're also mitigating their risk of liability.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
we've taken over venues that have had a lot of issues in the past, and we've been able to show the regulators that with responsible venue operators that things are going to improve, and they've been uh, almost happy to see a venue operator that they know is going to operate the venue responsibly.
Mhm. Well, you're in three really significant states as it relates to hospitality and entertainment venues. As long as you've been practicing in this area, have you noticed changes in the way that government approaches regulation? Um, and what improvements would you recommend for government in terms of their licensing and compliance process?
I've noticed. So in Florida, we just had a tort reform act passed, and that's helped. Uh, but the the regulatory process tends to focus on, I know you do a lot of dram shop work. It focuses on training, and if a venue has proper training, then the statutes give them, or at least avoids liability. Is the way
Mhm.
to put it. And I think that's helpful. I think the more that governments focus on requiring training, uh, we'll see less issues, and and venues will have less liability. I think it's a win-win situation.
Well, that brings up my question. South Carolina just joined, I think, 20, 21 other states that make it a requirement that people who serve alcohol have to go through some formalized training. And And then also in South Carolina, because they were having difficulty getting insurance, they modified some of the requirements for venues in terms of ways in which they could reduce their liability for the purposes of getting a better insurance package. Do you see a correlation between requiring server training and looking at insurance and the ways in which insurance
A hundred
regulates?
percent,
Yeah.
100%. We have we work with our insurance providers to make sure that we have training that they're comfortable with. Um, and to a certain extent, you're working with the person who's selling you insurance so that he could go to the carrier, he can go to the underwriter and point out to the underwriter, look, they've implemented all of these policies, they've implemented these educational programs, they've implemented this training that justifies a better rate.
Hmm.
Uh, I think venues that don't train are going to have problems getting insurance. And if they do get insurance, it's going to be cost prohibitive. So I think the training is critical. To the extent that the state requires the training, I think they're only helping their customers, their constituents that own venues.
Hmm. Have you seen? I mean, I started out in a nightclub in 1972. It's a minimal investment, but today you see massive investments in clubs like the one that you're working with in Miami, where the cost of turning the key to open the door is so huge, and then just operating it in terms of cost of security and insurance, and now all these camera systems that people put into place, and all of that other stuff that there's a big investment for a business that's also another incentive is that all of what they put into opening could be lost pretty quickly if they don't actually do the right thing.
Absolutely. People will always say to you, well, boy, the venues do this illegally or that illegally. And I remind them, I'm like, the dollars that went into opening the door are very large. No responsible venue owner is going to risk that by doing anything improper. The you talk about the camera systems, and I think that's really a critical point. Um, we've avoided a lot of litigation where I'll get a demand letter from an attorney saying, my client was at your venue and the venue treated them improperly, and we'll pull the tapes
Hmm.
and we'll send a video link of the tape to the attorney with a letter explaining, look, here's what happened. Here's the reports. Here's the video. What your client told you happened doesn't comport with reality. And if you're going to spend a lot of time and money as an attorney on this case, it's not going to pay the dividends you think it is because your client was in the wrong here. I've had cases where somebody's client came and, in swinging, took out 3 people.
Hmm.
And if the guardians, the security staff didn't stop them, you could see what would go wrong. Uh, so, those security procedures, the investment, uh, and the training, they all pay out, they pay for themselves.
Hmm. So
So,
those are like the key things. And it looks to me like what we're talking about here is you've got this kind of stool and you've got insurance, which creates an incentive. You got the regulatory system, which creates an incentive. You've got the liability protection, which creates an incentive, and then the overall investment in the business. So you've got 4 kind of pillars to try to have these responsible practices. So what do you think makes it so that some venues just ignore all of these different pillars and just proceed independently of their responsibilities?
that's always amazing to me that I think they're penny wise and pound foolish for doing that. Um, the money we spend on training pays for itself in lower insurance costs, pays for itself in lower liability. Um, the regulatory headaches that you save by being able to show that you're in compliance with, the many statutes and regulations that the city has, um, that pays for itself in staying open and having no issues. And The police in the area, if they understand that you're a good venue operator, they'll work with you.
Mhm.
So you become a much more profitable business by doing things right. So when I see venues cutting corners, um, that to me is always a penny wise and pound foolish mistake.
Well, you bring up police, and obviously fire is important. And Florida is that Pulse shooting in Florida really is a good example of um, the potential of what can happen. And you need to have good relations with police and fire because fire obviously there to make sure your occupancy is in control, and your police are there to be an active responder. I heard an expression the other day. We're doing our event in Nashville, and they have a very sophisticated interagency entertainment district team, which incorporates police, fire, uh, transportation. They have a safe bar program for training on sexual assault and sexual harassment prevention, which is another area of liability beyond just the service of alcohol. Um, and they really have a regular forum to meet with the venue operators and security. I did a walk around with the police, and they kind of, cheer each other and say hi, how you doing? They do regular active, what they call active aggressor trainings rather than active shooter training because, there are issues other than guns that require a response. So the active aggressor training that they do at the venue operators. So police and fire and alcohol regulatory, they all have to have some interaction with security. So how do you advise your clients that don't look at these agencies as the enemy, but really as partners?
They're not enemies. They're assets. And we have in Miami, we have the police come in and do active shooter training. We have the fire department come in and do not only CPR training, but they train people on Narcan and other methods of assuring that people are safe. We use the phrase for our security at the venues in Florida of guardians,
Hmm.
and that phrase isn't accidental. They're not the old bouncer that you think of in the movie Roadhouse, but
Yeah,
they're
with
guardians.
Swayze, yeah.
They're there to guard the customers and to make sure that everyone's safe. We post that that there's no drug use. We do what we can to police that. I mean, obviously nobody could be perfect, um, but you have an asset in the fire department because they will come in and train your staff, and they'll
Hmm.
train your staff for free. You got to pay
Hmm.
your staff to be there. The police department, they will come in and train your staff, and they love the fact that you're reaching out to them, and they're available. And
Hmm.
people who don't look at that as a resource, I think, are really passing up a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, in our work, there's a growing network of people who are providing what's called safe bar training, but it's more oriented to women's safety and women's safety in nightlife venues. So this is another area of responsibility, although it may not contribute to liability in the same way as if you serve or overserve somebody who gets involved in an accident or some kind of incident that causes harm. But just being aware of women's safety and the responsibility of that is another area. And so you've got a lot of burden placed on your guardians for many different issues. How do you help them to prioritize and understand? How do you balance in your trainings and from your own personal perspective? People are out to have a good time. When you have young adults, under
Right.
30, single, they're looking to meet people, they're going to be engaging in activities that really create the vibrancy. But at the same time, they could be misinterpreted by some as being harassment or aggressive. That's a fine line for your guardians to maintain control over a situation that's looking to be vibrant, but at the same time, intervene to prevent responsibility and liability.
The training that they get teaches them subtlety, right? Because subtlety's a critical point. If you see a young woman that a guardian thinks that she might be being harassed, it's important to just go over to the patron and say, we're here, right? And sometimes that's all somebody really needs to understand is there's an asset here to protect you.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and the guardians, they are from the door throughout the venue, and they're watching people get in Ubers, making sure that that's safe,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that's something you need to worry about today that you didn't, you know, 20 years ago, but you do today. So if a guardian, sees somebody that is acting hostile towards somebody, they'll they'll walk up to the woman and say, we're here if you need something,
Hmm.
and just let people know where the guardians are. And
Hmm.
boy, that really helps people have a better time
Yeah.
because that person who's ready to leave the venue might not.
Yeah. Well, you've covered a lot of ground. You've covered, all of the ways in which a venue has to look at what their responsibilities are and what the cost would be if they fail to meet those responsibilities. But there's lots of issues, whether it be alcohol service, active aggressors, shooters, sexual harassment, and everything else. So if you were to have somebody come to you as a venue operator and you wanted to really boil it down to evaluating that venue, what would be the three essential touch points that you would gather information about that venue in order to help them to be in compliance or a better operator?
I think what you have to do is you have to start uh, looking at the venue from your employee, from the minute you are hiring an employee. Um, you have to have good systems in place to vet your employees. You don't want employees that have a great deal of uh, background where you have to worry about them being um, overly aggressive, right? You're giving somebody a security position. You don't want somebody who's got a background that would lead you not to hire them. Uh, Once they're hired, you have to make sure, I also look at the employee agreement so that I, make sure that the venue is protected when they're retaining employees. I got all the employment litigation issues that you have to deal with. Uh, Once they're retained and they're onboarded, you have to make sure that they're trained. Uh, you have the server training for the people who are serving alcohol. You have the guardian training for your security personnel. Um, you have the employee training for the anti-harassment training. Uh, we do, um, we do all of that anti-harassment training so that everybody is in the venue and understands that it's a safe, comfortable place to work. And then you need a reporting mechanism. And it's really important for every issue that comes into the venue that your employees are trained on report writing. For anybody who's a police officer, one of the most important things that they remember that they're trained on is write a good report
Mhm.
because these cases are going to come to court. They may come to court 2 years down the road. Your guardian, your security personnel, your server, they're not going to remember what happened 2 years ago when this becomes my issue as the lawyer, right? So you have to train everyone on good report writing, and then you have to have systems in place to manage those reports. Um,
Right. So in summary, it's the screening the employees to make sure that they're the best qualified for the position that you're hiring them for. You have to provide them training so that they understand what their responsibilities are. And then you have to have a mechanism when there is an incident that there's a reporting system that provides the evidence that you might need in a future litigation.
yeah, and all of that's critical.
Yeah. Well, that's a great summary, and this has been a good interview, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and hopefully you're helping to not only create safer environments and more enjoyable environment, but obviously to protect the business.
Yeah, I think we're doing well, and we're making it a fun place to be. So
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate this.
thank you.
Okay.